Hello, this is Raziel Cohen with ndftraining.com, and today we're going to be talking about my plate carrier setup. Now, before we get into the details of what I have on my plate carrier, it's very important to understand that plate carriers are set up mission specific, which means what works for you might not work for someone else. And that's very important to take into account because a lot of people end up looking to the military to figure out what they prefer would be on their setup. But if that's not what your purpose is, there might be reasons for why they do specific things that might be completely irrelevant to you. Now, obviously, there's a good system set up like idea laid out about the reasons why the military does certain things, but you have to remember to end up customizing it to your specific purpose of use. So my primary purpose for having a plate carrier is because since I'm a firearms instructor, it's unfortunately very common for me to get muzzled at the range when I'm teaching new shooters, or when we have bigger classes and people are not still very aware about where their muzzle's pointing. Although that's obviously something that needs to be drilled in, it's common for me to end up getting muzzled. So that's the reason why I set up my plate carrier. Now, a part of that is I set it up as a teacher. So things that I have on my system are not going to be for someone in the military. It's not going to be for someone in law enforcement. It's meant for me to be able to be efficient at what I'm trying to do. And when you set up your plate carrier, you should have, again, the purpose of why you're setting it up in mind before you actually do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a general rundown of what's on my plate carrier and the reasons why I set it up the way that I did. And it might be something that will be applicable to you. It might not. Maybe you could take something out of it for understanding the reasons why I do something that will ultimately be put onto your carrier. Again, it's all about mission specific. So don't just take this as the best way to set something up and then just use it as the standard. It's important to figure out, again, what your purpose of use is and how it's going to be implemented for it to be effective. So to start off, the exterior, the main carrier itself is from Faro Concepts. This is the Faro Concepts Slickster. In my opinion, with a lot of different plate carriers I've tried on the market, for me this works the best because it's very minimalistic and it leaves a very uniform availability for what you'd want to end up modifying it for. So it's very, very neutral. There's not much going on with it, but the reason why I like that is because I could set it up for different styles of classes that I'm going to be giving, and that's specifically why I prefer it. I've used the 511 TacTac plate carrier before that for a while was getting a lot of popularity, but the issue I had with it is its yoke design in the back where the shoulders are, although for some was very comfortable, for me it made me realize that the back of the plate carrier was riding too low, and the higher I tried to put it, the more it was choking up on my neck, and for me it didn't work out. So I ended up going with the Faro Concepts Slickster. The benefit also is that on the sides of it, it has areas where you could attach additional magazines, or I put my ham radio over here that it's able to keep it all in one place. And then I added, the only thing I didn't really like is that I added a additional padding onto the shoulder straps because for me they were a bit thin and a little bit uncomfortable. So I got these generic shoulder straps to put on top, which also ends up helping manage cables a little bit more onto the back of the carrier. Now, the front of the carrier is where a lot of the action happens because what's becoming very popular right now is having these attachment hangers. So what it is it's two buckles that can be removed, and this is the raw plate carrier for what it is. There's not much going on with it. It's very simple. And then this is kind of where everything actually takes place. Now, the way I set it up for myself is I have 3 magazines on top for when I'm giving rifle classes, and I have the ID panel or things like that underneath that. On top, so where this would be hanging below is my firearms instructor patch, because that's more important than any other patches that people might see. This needs to be seen first for people, which is why it's on top for me in bright red, so it's very easily distinguishable. Now, inside this area over here, we have a bunch of different things that could go on. Over here, I have 2 Sharpies. They're both black Sharpies, meaning the actual ink in them is both black. However, I switched out one of them for a red cap, mainly because I use this only for medical, which means if I end up needing to use this after applying a tourniquet, I need to be able to make sure that the tourniquet I applied and the marker I'm going to use has ink in it. The other marker I use just for marking targets and see where students are holding, but the other marker I specifically only use for tourniquet use. The benefit of that is I know that no matter what, this will have ink in it. Now, it's good to use it every now and then so it's not dried out and to test your equipment all the time, but that's specifically why I have 2 different markers over here, one for marking targets, the other one specifically if I need to use it for any other medical reason. Inside, this actual pouch, I will have a additional empty magazine. So if I want to demo a drill and I have I have ammo inside my rifle, I'll just empty out the rifle and then put an empty magazine inside. It's just easier that way for me. So instead of trying to empty out an entire magazine, it's just easier for me to perform a drill quicker with a empty magazine. Over here, I have little note cards that I put together. These all have bullet points on them for depending on the class that I'm giving. It's a kind of a quick reference guide to make sure that I'm covering all the information that we need to cover for that day. So that goes in there. Additionally, what I end up usually doing is I end up keeping my cell phone in here because if I end up having my my belt on, it might be difficult to access my pockets. So I end up putting my my cell phone in there so it's easier to access. And then underneath that, I have a medical pouch. This medical pouch is specifically for my students. I have an additional one on the back of my belt that's specifically for me, but this has all the most important medical equipment I would need that if I need to render aid to a student, that they would be able to get that effectively. So let's do a quick overview of what's inside that medical pouch. I realized that it would be much better if I just give a better dive into it as opposed to kind of going through everything else. So first of all, I have a pair of gloves. You don't want to use black gloves. A lot of people like to use black gloves because it looks tactical. The issue is that if you end up using gloves like this, if you reach under someone's vest and you're not sure the difference between the textures of blood and sweat, you might not know if a person's bleeding there or not. Versus this, you'll be able to see it because you can see the blood once you pull it out. If you have black gloves, it could be harder to see, so I prefer to have something that'll be much more easily identifiable. I have two different types of hyphen vent chest seals. These are for a person who might get shot in the abdomen or in the chest. And these ones have a vent in them, which reduces the likeliness that you'll need to use a decompression needle. I'm not trained to use a decompression needle, so I don't have one. But that's the other things that I use. I also have a few different styles of compressed gauze. This is good for filling a wound and keeping pressure on the wound if a person gets shot in a leg or an arm or somewhere like that. I have Quick Clot. This one I'm actually able to get off Amazon. They're very affordable. They come in different packs, so this has a Quick Clot in it. And then I have an Israeli bandage to cover up the wound and really keep the pressure on if we need to end up transporting to the hospital. This is the kit that I specifically use for my students. I have a separate one that I only use for myself. That's important for you to understand that if you're an instructor, you need to have two of them because you need to make sure that you're okay as well because you're the person that's going to be controlling the situation. So if something happens that you need to make sure that you have medical attention, it's very important that you could render aid to yourself so that you could help others around you. Because if you use all your medical equipment on one person, if for whatever reason you end up needing for yourself, that could be very important. Also, in the event there might be two people that got injured, God forbid, having more than one set of medical equipment that could be used to render aid is also something that would be very important. Now, off the side of my hanging rig, I have also gloves. This is not for winter use, obviously. This is more for just general use. If I'm carrying targets or if I'm dealing with woods that have splinters, it will just help prevent it sucking really bad. So that's what I carry off to the side. And that's mainly the setup of the hanging part. What I'm going to do now is we're going to go talk about the actual plates that I use and the setup of the plates that I use to talk about the cost of them. What I noticed when I posted on Instagram a picture of this plate carrier is I noticed a lot of people are very unfamiliar with what the cost of a plate carrier setup could be. And a lot of people are not interested in buying a plate carrier, which might be very necessary for what they're doing, just because they haven't maybe done the research of what it could cost and also the weight of a lot of the carriers out there. Some people are very convinced that plate carrier setups could be well over 50 pounds, which is simply not the case. Now, again, depending on what your purpose of use is, that might be, but for the average person, that's not really what it should be. So let's transfer over now to the actual carrier itself and talk about the setup that I have over there. Okay, so now let's look at the main carrier itself and what's included inside of it. I've done a lot of research when it came to body armor, and originally I had plate sets from AR500. The reason why I went away from that was for a few reasons. First of all, they were a bit pricey. Secondly, the weight and the density of obviously it being just a steel plate was very heavy and very uncomfortable. So my previous setup weighed around 16 pounds just for the plates itself. And then once you add each additional magazine, if you have magazines that have 30 rounds, that's each one is going to be around a pound additionally of weight that you're adding to your carrier. So a setup could be very, very heavy. And if you're wearing it over long periods of time, for example, if I'm giving a class and the class, let's say, ends up being around 6-7 hours, that could be really, really exhausting. And it doesn't need to be that way because of the reasons why you have your carrier. So what I ended up doing is I was doing a lot of research, and one company that stuck out to me as being affordable and having the ratings that I need is Botac Tactical. They have really good plates at really affordable prices in comparison to anything else I've seen on the market. So for 2 plates that I've had from them in comparison to other places, you're getting it at a much cheaper price. Also, the biggest thing was the weight savings. The weight savings was incredible. So instead of going from around 16 pounds just for the plates, I believe I'm at around 9 pounds for this carrier, which is much lighter and makes a huge difference when you're wearing it over long extended periods of time. Behind the plate itself, I have an AR500 trauma pad, which is one of the things I think AR500 has done very well. They have a trauma pad that goes behind the plate that if you get impacted by a round, it reduces the amount of back face deformation that could end up really taking you out of the fight as opposed to getting shot. What it used to be is a person would have, let's say, a Kevlar vest. If they got shot, yeah, they survived, but the amount of impact that hit them in the chest completely takes them out of the fight because it could be very, very bad. So if you wear level 3A body armor and you get impacted by a shotgun round, although that you survived the shotgun round, it might have hit you so hard that you might not have been able to actually get back into the fight and survive it. So the reasons why I ended up going to a level 3+ plate is because it reduces the amount of impact that you've taken. And with the addition of a trauma pad on the back, it really reduces the amount of back face deformation that could ultimately take you out of the fight. So for the cost of it and for the weight of it and for the size of it, which is not super thick, that's probably the one I'd end up recommending if you end up wanting to go with a plate. Now, there could be a whole discussion talking about which level plate you should be able to use. For me, again, and for my purpose, I went with level 3+, which it's able to stop the most common rifle and pistol rounds that are available on the market. Level 4 is also really nice. The reason why I didn't go for that is a little bit because of the cost and a little bit because of the weight additions that it needs. And I don't usually need that kind of rating for the classes that I give. Again, if you're using it for the end of the war, Civil War, Revolution, whatever, you might want to go with a level 4. But for me, I felt that level 3+ was completely sufficient for what I needed. And the weight of it is what works really well for me. So that's kind of an overview of the play carrier system that I use. Again, it's very specific to purpose of use and why you need it to be set up in the way that you have it set up. And before you go out buying and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on anything you end up wanting to use, the reasons why I say that much is because depending on what systems you go with, you might realize that some systems work for you and some systems don't. So before you start setting anything up, get a list down of what your goals are for that system and why you need that system before you start buying things, because it could literally cost you thousands of dollars before you realize what ends up working best for you. So it's ideal not to cheap out, and cheap out doesn't mean that it's actually spending a lot of money. It just means that you're getting what makes sense specifically for your purpose. So do some research, figure out what works best for you. This is simply what works best for me. And again, this is still an overview. We could go much more into detail of everything else included into this carrier. But this is what I've decided works best for me. And hopefully you'll be able to take something out of this to understand why I chose the things that I've chose. So if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us on our website. You can reach out to us on Instagram. We're doing very well there. We're posting weekly training videos that might be very beneficial to you. And you can follow up on the discussions that we have over there to see how we could help each other expand on our gear and expand on our training. And that could be very beneficial to you as well. This is Raziel Cohen with ndftraining.com. Thank you for watching.